This session is really about Indian technology. What has India done? What does India can do? What is it doing? Is it even able to do something which can be called Indian technology? I'm Pranjal Sharma, but I'm going to start with a question to all of you, and I'm going to request that I would like all of you to be participating in this discussion as much as all of us here. But one question that I have in my mind is that when we talk about India technology, does India even have technology? I mean, India has information technology, but do we have technology or not? So before we talk about can Indian technology go global, the question is what technology do we have that can possibly go global? Um, and joining me in this discussion will be Sanjay Anandram, Ambassador iSpirt India, Sanskriti Davle, CEO and co-founder of Thinkerbell Labs India, Ashish Agarwal, Vice President and Head of Public Policy of Nasscom, and Imane Berchane. She is the co-founder and general manager Robos and more from Morocco. So it is international in nature, but I'm going to begin by asking Sanjay about this because, Sanjay, my sense is that India has information technology and India has perhaps models, but India has never been known for creating technology in the classic sense that you see in US or Europe. Where would you see India technology today?
Thanks, Thanks, Pranjal, and good evening, everybody. Uh, Clearly, it's no secret that India doesn't really own technology in the sense that it's understood around the world. We spend 0.8% of GDP on R&D, for example, right, which is really a small number, and that number has been stagnant for the past very many years. So you're unlikely to get any really new, cool technology coming out of such low sums of investment in R&D. But what India has done, and this is something that is very, very important for us to keep in mind, India is the only country in the world at a $2,000 per capita income to have led the world and is leading the world in thinking about digital transformation of societies with new innovative business models, technology policy, and also by building core blocks, what are called DPGs, digital public goods, on top of which digital public infrastructure is created. So the ability to conceptualize, design, deploy, and enable solutions at continent scale, at bewildering diversity, across languages, across use conditions, has been a seminal event in India's history. And that is what is attracting the attention of everybody, from the US to Europe to Australia to the UK, etc., etc.
But Sanjay, is it like it's not technology alone? It's technology-based model.
Precisely.
Where you are looking at delivering something. That is the key that India has.
Precisely. So if you look at how the world of technology has moved, technology has come out of labs, whether they're corporate labs or government-funded labs or academic institutions, etc. Then they get converted into a commercially viable solution. And I was just, as I was mentioning to you, take Apple, for example. There's not a single piece of new technology that Apple has in the iPhone. Everything has been invented, sourced, redeveloped, innovated upon by Apple, including, say, Siri, for example. Siri is not an Apple invention. It was done by a startup that Apple acquired. Android was not something that Google built. Android was a separate startup that Google acquired, and so on. So the point being that technology by its very nature is built by people from across, exactly like what the minister was saying, so the need for collaboration. And one of the great abilities that India has demonstrated is the ability to synthesize conceptually as well as in fact and in business models.
I think that's a brilliant point, Sanjay, because what India has done, it's taken some of the best technologies, but it has created solutions to solve for India. And I think that's a critical piece because, and Ashish, I'm going to come to you now, because traditionally what we saw in the Indian IT services was that they were solving for the world. They were supplying backroom services of information technology for global corporations across the world. But that foundation has benefited India as well, right? So is that how you see things developing, Ashish?
So absolutely, I think just to build on what Sanjay just mentioned, so one, we definitely are the leader in information technology. And on top of that, I think where we are seeing a lot of success is on the application layer. And that's where a lot of the stuff is happening. And while the information technology bit in terms of the market, over 80-85% just exports. And some of that benefit where the Indian user industry actually catches up to make use of that, I think that's a huge way forward, and we are seeing that. But on the application layer, I mean, we are talking about unicorns, but we have more than 3,000 odd deep tech startups. These are Indian startups who are in, and these are not one or two technologies like Web3 or IoT or drones. Across 8-9 emerging technologies are now going global, in sense that 78% of them have B2B solutions, and most of those enterprise solutions are sought globally. And these are the companies, because of their talent, because of the solution capabilities that they've built, are being attracted overseas. And not just attracted in the sense from a point of view of business. There are countries which are saying that come and just list here and be here. So I think from a transition phase, I think that's the new technology space that India is seeing in terms of just the industry itself, Pranjal.
Thanks. Sanskriti, you are an example of an entrepreneur who has created solutions for India, for resolving the challenges that India has created technology, created solutions, because some of the models that we see globally in US or Europe or other developed markets, they don't necessarily apply to India. Give us a sense of how you approached it.
Sure. I'd like to start by saying I disagree with India does not have technology. India very much does
Excellent.
have technology.
I was looking for some disagreement, and I would love to see some more disagreement from the floor.
Yeah, I mean, with respect to what Sanjay said, I mean, technology is built in labs. Like, we named our company Thinkable Labs because we envisioned developing core tech and the innovation layer on top of it to solve problems that are not just Indian, but they're global problems. And I think the only thing that differs is in the implementation of how you use the technology. So, for example, we create Braille learning technology for visually impaired children to learn in an inclusive environment, to learn Braille. And our tech is the only remote-enabled Braille learning technology in the world. So we're currently not only solving India's problem, but due to the pandemic, remote learning and edtech has become a big focus area for countries all over the world. So currently our tech is serving not just 70 smart classes in India, but also all of the US. That's Indian-made technology, patented technology that's serving another country entirely, and we're just getting started because Braille literacy and education is a global phenomenon, a global problem to be solved. And I mean, I know that we are not alone in building tech in India that solves for the world's problems. The implementation and the exact specifics of the business model might differ from place to place, but the technology is very much there, and the ambition is very much there to build in India and go global with who all we can serve with that technology.
So, when I say there is no technology, I'm also defining it. Let me refine it. What you're doing is fantastic, and there are many, many, many such examples in India. But it's only now that we are investing in telecom hardware technology. We didn't have that. We never invested in semiconductor technology or manufacturing, which we could have about 20 to 30 years ago, but we somehow never managed to do that. If we look at the post-pandemic world, India is now realizing that you've got to invest and create your own capabilities, because excessive dependence on other countries for technologies and critical inputs is not sustainable. And that's where I'm going to come to you, Imane, that it's not just India, developing countries across the world, emerging economies across the world are realizing post-COVID and post-Ukraine war as well, that you have to stand on your own feet. Give us a perspective from Morocco. How does Morocco look at technology? Are you now realizing that you've got to focus on developing your own technology, be open to more sources of technology like from India?
I think that post-pandemic, there has been more awareness about the importance of opening up to other markets and the importance of seeing a bigger picture than we are used to. I think that there is recently, with all the conflicts in the world, a lot of a movement of nationalism that we're seeing all over the world, specifically about importation of services, but also goods. And I think that Morocco is as well a part of that movement, as to having to support digital innovation internally. We have seen recently in the government creation of a lot of entities that are aiming to support the startup ecosystem and the digital transformation, and a ministry for digital transformation that is looking into partnerships with other ecosystems such as India, and that is trying to see what are the synergies that we can create and the models that we can duplicate, but at the same time localize. I think that the model of India is specifically interesting because most of the models that we see all over the world are an inspiration for countries such as Morocco, but they do not take into consideration the local specificities that do not allow them to operate in such markets. And I think that a little bit of both, being open into an international perspective, but as well seeing the models that have been able to work in a very specific and local level, is very important to keep up in this process.
Can I comment
Sure,
on
please
that
come in,
very quickly?
Ashish.
Because how you define technology, right? You mentioned about the hardware part. But if you think of, let's say, UPI, is that not technology? Because it's fastest payments anywhere in the world, and Europe, America are struggling with fast payments. You look at health sector, I mean, given the...
I think there was an example of a European country which said that we can't give electricity subsidy in the energy crisis because we haven't mapped the account numbers with the national identity and the electricity meters. So even if they wanted to give, let's say, 100 euros per person per month, they don't know how to digitally deliver it.
Yeah, Germany had a problem with
And
that.
just you take that we had this entire pandemic, and we were able to deliver 2 billion odd vaccines, not because we developed something yesterday or at the time when the pandemic struck, but because we had built the railroads of technology for that. And just even from a startup perspective, given from a Indian context point of view, that our ability to pay for solution, we can't pay for very expensive solutions, right? So if you look at cancer detection and so on and so forth, there are so many solutions which our startups are developing, which are at a fraction of a cost, delivering high quality solutions. Probably they are not global yet. Probably they are not at that valuation level yet for them to be so well known. But definitely, I think if you look at it from that lens, we are on a super technology journey.
So
Let me
Sanjay,
just-
go ahead.
I just want to add to that. And I think what you were alluding to when you said technology was really deep, solid stuff, meaning semiconductors, building the next telecom router, that kind of capability. And that's very true because it takes huge amounts of capital to be invested to create that kind of technology. And given the cost of capital that we had in India, apart from the scarcity, it was impossible. China is building and delivering its first jetliner next year, right? Something that America had done 50 years ago. So that shows that what it takes, not just from a talent perspective, but infrastructure, countries' own modernization abilities, et cetera, for that to happen. The good news is, like Mark Andreessen said many years ago, software is eating the world. And today, a Tesla car has more lines of code than a F-14 fighter jet, right? Whether you take agriculture, you take financials, you take biotech, you take any sector of the economy, it is run by software. And once it comes to that, where everything is abstracted in software, India has a huge advantage naturally, right? And we should not be biased by what's happened in America and elsewhere. I think there is a new model emerging, and that new model is the way that India is conceptualizing, designing, and providing solutions. In fact, the world's most popular digital public goods has been conceptualized, designed, developed by India, in India. And by the way, Morocco was actually the first country that accepted it It's inspired by Aadhaar. It's an open source piece of software that's a foundational identity system. 9 countries have signed up for it because the rest of the world, which is the 6 billion people who are outside the developed world, right, are the folks who need the kind of stuff that India can provide at the right cost point, by the right value, and the building blocks are such that they can in turn innovate on top of it.
I think it's a great point, Sanjay, because when I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs and startups and technology folks outside India, when they are conceptualizing a model, they are looking at a market of 10 million or 20 million. In India, you don't even get up unless it's about a 200 million people solution, right? So the scale that we have to operate in is also ensuring that we look at an answer at that level. I'd like to get some questions and thoughts from the audience. So if you have any thoughts and interventions, please raise your hand. And I think there are mics on these 2 corners. Please come up and introduce yourself. Do I see anybody coming up? No, I think only a gentleman leaving. It's not such a bad discussion. I think, would you like to come up over here? There's a mic next to you. Please introduce yourself. It should be voice activated. I hope we get that technology. Can somebody activate this, please?
Hello.
Okay, please go ahead. Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Akash Goglani. I work as Senior Policy Associate at Digital India Foundation. So we work on ONDC, which uses interoperability and open systems. So my question is on that thing only. So right now UPI is subsidized by government, 1,300 crores. So what's the future of, let's say, open source code? So how do you see monetization happening? Because right now government comes in and starts monetizing, but in the future, if you want to make it sustainable, it's not proprietary. So what's the revenue mechanism and what's the optimization strategy to make sure it's sustainable in the long term?
Thank you. That's a good question.
Yeah, let me
Sanjay, you and Ashish.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. So thanks for that question. I think, so I'll just answer it at 2 levels. It's a complicated topic. Those who are building solutions using UPI, whether it's GPay or PhonePe or Paytm, whoever, they make money thanks to the UPI app, right? GPay made more than 1,000 crores last year. And then the system makes money because the amount of float, the credit float in the economy, in the banking system, thanks to UPI is of the order of 25 to 30,000 crores because velocity of capital, moving through it. You have to think about digital public goods as national highways that a state or state provides. Innovation is like the automobiles that the private sector builds, right? So that's the conceptual model. From an India perspective, what's going on is we are creating new kinds of institutions. An NPCI, for example, is a brand new institution. ONDC is a Section 8 company. It's a new institution. Never before in the history of e-commerce has something like ONDC been attempted. You agree?
Yeah.
It's built on DPG, there's DPI. It's an incredibly complex system. But you have to design it for someone who's got a vegetable cart outside and who can still transact with it. There's a piece of technology called OCEN, OCEN, that is on its way. 2 years from now, you'll see it. How it will democratize credit. In under 5 minutes, you can borrow your money. It'll hit your bank account. Everything happens on the back end. So there are a host of such technologies that are emerging, right? It's a question of the system design and how it all comes together. With regard to policy making, with regard to business models, with regard to regulation, right? All of these are works in progress. For example, conflict resolution, right? Redressal mechanisms. All of that are going to happen as the technology starts getting deployed. Real world challenges will emerge, solutions will be found. You cannot get a perfect answer on day 0. These are what are called 30-year issues. Aadhaar is 12 years old, by the way. We don't think about it that way, right? UPI is 6 years old, right? We don't think about it that way. because the half-life starts decreasing at an exponential pace given the experience curve of the entire technology dissemination, right? So it will happen. The question is, do we have the right frame of thinking about it, conceptual models? Are we thinking about it from the standpoint of three things: institutions, standards, and markets, right? If you think on these three vectors, all the answers will be found.
Thank you. That's a very good answer. Thank you. Please take your seat. I think it's very important what you say when ONDC is trying to crack a problem which is a global issue of competitiveness, of ensuring that there is no duopolies, monopolies in e-commerce. How do you make sure that it is democratized? And that's a challenge which every developed country and every antitrust regulator is also struggling with. But Sanskriti, I want to talk to you about this. Some of these are very large issues at scale, but the micro-entrepreneurship that you were talking about of finding solutions, developing technology for specific issues, what kind of ecosystem do you see and what kind of models do you see which can be taken to the world?
So I think, like what Sanjay said, the framework to make those things work, like the highway building is out of scope for a small startup, but getting a lay of the land, what are the opportunities, what highways are going to be built, and therefore what opportunities open up. I think that's something that transfers very well from any sector to any sector, because specifically speaking about education, which is where we operate, the national education policy is a huge step in sort of setting that North Star from a policy perspective, saying that here are the kinds of schools we'll build and here's the kind of education system India wants to work on. So in there are many, many smaller improvements that need to be scaled up rapidly, because for a country like India that wants to adopt a new education policy, you're going to have the task to transform your education system at a very, very large scale. So, I mean, for us, that's where we come in terms of inclusive education and using technology to drive that transformation at scale in the quickest amount of time. So similar to that, just like education, there are a few startups I know that are working in healthcare, specifically with UHID coming in. There are so many other opportunities that come up. They'll be small. I mean, it won't be the same consolidated view as, say, a government body looks at it while designing the system. But from an entrepreneur perspective, it's about being aware of, where the tide is going, and the tide is going to a very nice place when it comes to digitization and innovation and, like governments are investing heavily in modernizing the way they govern. So that as a whole sector is very ripe, and not just for India but across the world. And then with technologies like UPI, for example, that's just one of the examples of what can be scaled to other countries. But that's just the tip of the iceberg as well. So from an entrepreneur's perspective, yeah.
Sanskriti, from your perspective, you could perhaps collaborate with Imane over here, because she's also in education and she's using robotics to teach better across various subjects, right?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, we use robots to help develop 21st century skills for kids, and at the same time teach them about cutting edge or problems of the world, like, for example, energy or transportation, and we help them try to think about the problems in their communities and try to solve them. And I'd like to echo, I actually was really interested and impressed by the work that you are doing at Thinker Labs, and I think that could be something we could work on to.
So we're looking at a pre-collaboration conversation here, folks. So, this could be one of the rare moments when you see a collaboration come into picture. But I think the point is that the models for education are similar in emerging economies.
Yes.
What is the inspiration that you use? What are the benchmarks that you use in Morocco? Do you look at Europe? Do you look at East Asia? Do you look at Sub-Saharan Africa? Do you look at India? What are you looking at when you want to evolve your models?
So one of the most, I think, great experiences that I have been exposed to internationally is the BET show, which is, I think, one of the biggest events in education technology in the world. I had the chance to visit that in London a few years ago, and it was a really impressive occasion to see the contribution of other countries like India, for example, and China, and how this education technology market is being reshaped by these solutions. We have the tendency to think that the bigger players always have a place, but we see the amount of innovation that comes out every year, and how new players are helping shake, the status quo and what is used as a basis for innovation in this world. And I think this has been a great opportunity for me. This is like where we get our inspiration from. It's very important for us to keep facing the outside and see what's going on out there, so that we can see what models can be copied. And I think the thing about this is that when you go to global solutions like those developed in the US, for example, they can be geared towards more markets like the US, Australia, or the UK, but there are not components. Like, one of the most important components is accessibility, for example, and inclusive digitization in markets such as ours, and that's something that you find specifically developed by countries that have populations that are similar to ours.
I think this is
Can I just comment
interesting
on,
development. Ashish, I'll just say, I think that the next level of globalization is not necessarily for billion-dollar companies. It's happening at every level. So a small startup can also have a global footprint, and it doesn't have to be that until they reach unicorn status. I don't know, would you like to comment? Yeah.
If I may, on that, I can share from personal experience that earlier in the assistive tech sector, to actually expand internationally, you had to sort of meet people in person, and therefore as a startup you had to have the capital to go to, 10 countries and start meeting people. And due to the pandemic, our international expansion is, again, it's amazing to meet people in person, but it does not rely on that, because people have switched to working remotely. So that represents a huge opportunity for smaller companies, specifically Indian companies, specifically Indian startups, to forge partnerships in similar markets all over the world, because the world has changed. The way the world does business has changed, and
that's a good
really,
point.
Yeah.
Ashish?
So clearly, I think just to build on, and I have a couple of points on after pandemic came in, the entire focus has actually been on saying that how can we have a better understanding of digital talent, so that across countries, when we are talking about digital skills and talent, we are able to easily relate, and therefore, talent can be used in a manner where you don't have to then rely on standards of a particular country. And that's a big initiative, and that will really make the Indian talent so much more available, not just in terms of people moving or working in different countries or startups going abroad, but just a lot of work happening in India. And to the earlier point you mentioned the education example. So if you look at south of equator and look at countries in terms of their workforce, informal workforce, right? Social protection is a huge challenge. So stuff like identity, payments, these are things which are not available a decade back. And some of these problems are our common problems, which we can't have let's say, a Western solution implemented because of the nature of our population. So I think that's an opportunity which is still there. And finally, I think to the point which was earlier, the question that was asked, 20 years back or even 15 years back, if somebody had told us that government is going to get into building something like Aadhaar, or government will set up payment systems like UPI, we would have just said, stay out of it. So I think that entire shift has been that government has now evolved these models where they can actually execute these digital platforms. And so when something like ONDC comes up, which sounds like even more ambitious, actually we are quite clear that there is going to be a success and not too long. So I think that entire shift of a government role, I think that's tremendous. So I think that these are some of the things which are really.
Any more thoughts and questions? Yes, the lady over there and the lady in the front. Can we request you to come to this mic, please, after she puts a question? Yes, please introduce yourself.
Hey, my name is Afef. I'm coming from Tunisia, North Africa. So I'm working on the climate justice sector. So we're talking all the time about the technology, and this is something amazing, the ICT sector, but sometimes we miss talking about the impact of technology on the climate. So, and we forget a little bit to talk about the green transition, so the role of the ICT sector on the green transition. and the just transition as well. So what is the role that India today, or Morocco or other countries in the region, in the whole world, I don't know if there is some people here who want to share their opinion, for example, what is the role of the ICT sector on reducing the carbon emission, but also how do the ICT sector participate on the green transition today?
Thank you. I'll take that question as well and then come to the panel for the answers.
Is the mic working? Yes?
Yes, it's working.
My name is Alice Panier. I'm from the French Institute of International Relations. Open source has been mentioned already a couple of times. Indeed, open source is a global community, and since we're talking about IndiaTech going global, I'm just wondering what's your views on the health of the global open source community at this point. There's been major cybersecurity concerns, and we see states in the US, in China, in Europe, trying to get involved somehow in either cyber securitizing the open source or trying to have a nationalistic take on open source. Just wondering how you see that's going from an India perspective.
Thank you. So Sanjay, the expert. Go ahead, Sanjay.
Thank you. I'll answer the second question first and then Kelly, right? There's this project called MOSIP. I'll just take that as an example which will answer your question. Modular Open Source Identity Platform. It's a legal foundational identity platform for the world. It's designed, conceptualized, developed, and deployed from India, from Bangalore, the city I come from. And Morocco is one of the countries that is deploying it for a national population register. Philippines is deploying it. And there are 9 other countries in the pipeline. Why are they choosing it? For the simple reason that people, and I think you alluded to it, people want solutions that are vendor agnostic, technology agnostic, country agnostic, from the point of view of sovereignty. They want control over the key building blocks of their country's security mechanism, governance systems, and deployment of public benefits and services. They do not want, let's say, a situation where another country controls access and can turn it off or switch it off based upon geopolitics, right? So that is the fundamental, foundational reason for open source gathering momentum around the world. And now, how is that open source itself going to be managed, going to be regulated, going to be governed, etc., etc., is a topic for another discussion. And we have a session tomorrow in the evening that will probably cover some of that. So that is a short kind of answer to a deep question. Coming to the issue of green and all of it, which the lady asked about green. Software by its very nature is environmentally the most friendly piece of technology relative to everything else, right? However, where there's a huge consumption of technology, of power, comes in the big data centers that run. The data centers piece is where a lot of power gets consumed, not in the writing of the code or not in the deployment of the code. If you take Tesla, for example, and I'll keep taking that example, I said it's got more lines of code than a F-14 fighter jet. But, and here's the big but, Tesla has a lithium-ion battery that runs the vehicle, 450 kilograms. You know what all it contains? Cobalt, manganese, aluminum, etc., right? Where do these come from? From the mines in Africa. How are they mined? Using enormous amounts of energy. To produce aluminum, bauxite gets converted to aluminum. And that's the most energy inefficient process in industrial engineering, the conversion process, right? So there is no free lunch. We can, at one end, consume it and feel good, but at the other end, there's a price to pay. So coming to this issue about consuming data, the entire internet runs off data centers, right? And there's huge amount of power. So what are countries doing? Companies doing? They're hosting data centers in countries like Iceland. They're coming up with more innovative technologies so that the heat consumption and the power consumption of these massive farms of data centers reduce. Solar cannot power a data center. You understand? So you have to look at it in totality and then say, net, is there a benefit to using this relative to something else? Is it less polluting than something else? Because there is no perfect answer.
There are also, I must tell you, there is a huge ecosystem of green tech entrepreneurs and startups in India. They're getting very well funded from ensuring, so smart manufacturing as a concept ensures parts of what Sanjay spoke, where you reduce electricity consumption, you reduce the waste which is created, plastic usage is down, new options for plastic are being considered. So entire range, from recycling and upcycling of products, let's say electronic waste, there are ecosystems developing there. So there are so many different models. I won't say there is one model, but there is a range of activities which is happening.
So
You want to add, Ashish?
data centers, so all data centers can't be in Iceland probably.
Exactly.
So there is this entire concept of power banking where that, I think, along with the industry and government working together so that you can actually use solar power in a more, meaningful manner. And that really has happened. And a lot of state governments are working very hard to make sure that, industry can trade in power and get the credit for using solar. So to the extent, I think it's not just about the technology industry, but it's also about the ecosystem coming together to kind of that. But the incentives are there, and for the data center industry, there's a huge push internally from the industry that we want to use clean energy.
I have a question for the entire panel. Based on your experience so far, as India takes the G20 presidency in December, what can India then offer to the world? We are not speaking of technology in the classical sense, but we are talking about technology-based answers, solutions, models, which have been created in India, but for problems which are not just Indian, but perhaps global. Sanjay, Ashish, Sanskriti and Imane, I'd like you to bring your thoughts on that.
So I think what India offers is a new way of thinking about the development, deployment, and consumption of digital public goods, which means a new way of policy formulation, new way of regulation, new business models, new legal frameworks, and new use cases, which is what India has done at scale, at phenomenal diversity. There are 30 languages in India spoken by more than 1 million people. Now imagine the challenges of dealing with the illiteracy, the network connectivity, the socio-economic conditions. On any parameter, India is unbelievably diverse. How do you craft solutions at the right price point but delivers maximum value, right? Designing that system, which is what is on offer today to the world. And India, as the G20, as it assumes the presidentship, that is the conversation India is having on being able to offer this thinking on the regulatory side, policy side, legal side, business model side to make this thing happen. Just a quick point, Aadhaar cost less than $1 per identity. The UK had a system in the 1990s called Verify. It cost them £60 per identity. They said it's not going to work, right? It is that thinking that is phenomenally different, meaning grounds up thinking, not transplanting ideas from elsewhere. That's the fundamental difference.
Sanskriti?
I couldn't agree more. It's just a fresh look with fresh constraints. And I think when we go into the G20 presidency, more than any new technology, like technology that does not exist today, more than any new tech, I think what India has to offer is successful implementation of technologies that exist in a way to convert it from being something that sits in a lab to something that actually changes lives of people every day in terms of, and to what extent government is involved in this, whether it's the payments infrastructure, whether it's identity, whether it's education, whether it's health. Those are very key, very, very basic questions of what does a government do? And we've all been revisiting that thanks to the pandemic. We've all been questioning that from first principles. And India is absolutely, I definitely think India is the leader in implementing whatever technology is there in a large scalable way across diverse sectors. So that is something we can offer to the world, and we are offering across all our own sectors.
Yeah.
I think India had an opportunity to experiment with these systems for tens of years now, for example, for UPI. And I think that presents an amazing opportunity to show the world what these systems have been able to deliver. I think one of the points that we discussed earlier is how to showcase that economically, how to present incentives to financial institutions, for example, to give these new technologies or new ways of seeing things a place and a market in the world and beyond India. I think these models that have been developed need to be, in a way, need to showcase the work that have been done through the G20, of course, and to show that we can actually measure the impact. For example, if we are using zero MDR as an example, if the government is investing in that, and if other governments would be inclined to invest in that as well, that they can demonstrate the impact and the plus and the growth that will be able to provide it and deliver to the countries and different institutions such as banks.
But tell me, I have a very basic question of you. In Morocco, in North Africa, in other parts of the world, when a solution comes from India, is it seen as perhaps not the best answer? Because if it came from Europe, people will say, well, it's the best in the world. But if it comes from India, well, let's think about it. Is it cheap? Then we'll get it. So what is the perception that you see about solutions and technologies coming from India?
I think there is a misconception about some of the solutions that are developed in Asia generally, like quality-wise, but I think that they have the opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of the solutions, and I think that has been done on several occasions. In Morocco, quality is not the first aspect that the customer will look at, and I think that's similar to a lot of countries. That would be also the price, that would be the effectiveness, the localization. For example, if a solution has a bigger community of people that are using it, and that community speaks their own language, they will be more inclined to apply it and I think more local solutions that are smaller and trying their hard to go into the world will make a bigger effort into localizing, for example, and making it accessible to these communities than bigger companies that maybe have the resources to do that, but that's not their main focus.
We have time for one question from the audience, and I see a very rapid hand going up. Would you like to go to the mic, because the mic can't come to you?
So my question is, when we are deliberating over the spread of the technology and open source, but yet in relationship with the developed world, we find the intellectual property rights undermine such development or spread of technology. And in this dilemma of spread of technology and intellectual property right, how we will go forward?
Okay, your introduction, please.
My name is Harjit Singh.
Okay, perfect. Intellectual property rights, Ashish, I think you're very well placed to talk about IPR. Is that holding us back, or is that going to take us forward? Because we know that China has a bad reputation on IPR. India has a much, much better reputation. We haven't developed anything by stealing IPR.
So just from an overall regulatory environment and the ecosystem, I think we are on a strong footing. I think there have been at times, stuff like some policy discussions around e-commerce where there are various buzzwords and where people start thinking that people would be asked to reveal their algorithms and so on and so forth. But I think we are in very early stages of discussion, so wouldn't worry about IPR as a cause of concern for being in India or not being in India. But I also wanted to comment on the G20 presidency itself. And I think it's a great opportunity given the extent of digitalization that has happened. So G20 presidency is a great place to ask the right questions and not necessarily go and say India has these great solutions and let's build out these for you, or let's help you build that. So I wouldn't go in that direction. But I think if you think of a citizen-centric digital economy, that's where I think the future is for the world. And that has to rely on inclusion and trust. And we have developed enough in India to say that, okay, look, we can talk with you together and be a facilitator, and we as G20, if we can come to some of these understandings of principles, and then right technology, digital infrastructure, focus on security, talent, And some of these aspects, if these are the discussions at G20 and how can these be used to deliver a citizen-centric digital economy, I think that will be a good step forward, because in my view, sometimes the G20 presidency seems to move from presidency to presidency and doesn't necessarily have a cohesive follow-up structure. And now if you want to do anything constructive in the digital economy context, you need to build that structure where it doesn't just end with the presidency and then we move on to the next. So that will be my thought there.
Thank you, Ashish. I think what's very clear, and I really must compliment ORF CyFy for the topic of taking Indian tech digital. The few points that I could gather from our experts and all of you in the audience is that the tech from India, which can go global, is a model which is inclusive, which is open, which is local, which can be localized, which is targeted, and of course, which is vendor neutral. And I think if we look at this, clearly this model that India has done at scale can perhaps benefit the entire world. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.